Hello, everyone. I'm Svitek, and one of my greatest pleasures in my mission of helping aspiring artists is whenever I get to bring in incredible people and interview them and share their wisdom, their experience, their knowledge, all that good stuff. And today I am joined by Toby Cochran. He is someone I met at the World Animation Summit, which is a wonderful, wonderful event if you've never been. It's all amazing people from the animation space. Quick side note, as great as filmmakers are in terms of building a community, the animation world is just even more generous than I've ever experienced in my life. And Toby was one such person that I met there. And we'll get into all the ins and outs of everything he does. But my entry point, just to kind of kick us off, was this incredible short film called LUKi the Lights, and it's absolutely amazing. I loved it. So, but kind of taking a quick step back, I want to give us a quick bio of I'm stealing from the Team Deakins podcast, which is hosted by Roger Deakins, world famous cinematographer, and they always ask, how did you get to the point? How did you get to here? Like, did you always want to be an animator?
Yeah, how I got here. Let me rewind a little bit, but thank you, Phil, for having me on. And I absolutely love the Animation Summit as well. How I got here, probably just a lot of stubbornness, tears, and determination. I've kind of been in the animation game for almost 20 years now, in different aspects, from video games to animation series to films to a lot of commercial type stuff, a little bit of robotics, mobile games, like you name it. I've kind of dabbled and played with a little of everything, in that regard. But I love, at the end of the day, stories and telling stories. So just being able to breathe life into characters, whether it was, when I started drawing traditionally on paper in school, and then that moved to Flash, and then that moved to learning the computer, which I just absolutely hated because I wrestled with that for a long time. And then, kind of went down this path for animation, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would because I missed drawing so much. And then that's when I kind of pivoted probably 11, 12 years ago to storyboarding, which I absolutely just love storyboarding because you get to wear all hats for all of production, right? Editing, composition to tone, style, design, all that stuff, and heavily focusing on story. So that's a little bit of kind of like where I kind of started and how I got here.
Yeah, I mean, I love your bio on your website about all the life adventures too, and how that's a part of kind of your storytelling process, right? And I love that idea that you have to experience the world in order to be able to tell something meaningful. And so, can you expand upon that? I mean, it's quite an impressive list of everywhere you've been. France, Netherlands, Costa Rica, Nepal, New Zealand, and all Japan. So, I was
Yeah.
wildly fascinated reading that.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to my very first trip and plane ride ever was to Japan when I was 19, and we were going with our school to go study and do some stuff in Japan for studying animation. Well, it turns out we didn't do anything related to animation over there, but there was a good group of us that attended. But my buddy and I decided to go before the group came out because we kind of wanted to do our own thing. And I'm so grateful that I did that with him because once we met up with the group, it was just one of those kind of stereotypical, you know, tour guide groups. Jump on a bus, they load you up, they take you to all the kind of cliche places, kind of force you to buy the same junk at all the little shops, but everybody's selling the exact same thing at different prices. And to us, once we got in there, we're like, oh man, this is like nothing like the experience that we had. And that was kind of the initial kickoff for me of just experiencing the world, and it's like, oh my God, this is so much bigger than I realized. And just being able to be present and have conversations and forcing myself to have talks with people that don't speak English or I don't speak Japanese, and being able to find ways to communicate. I just love that. And then obviously drawing, so I love people watching, and I learn a lot from just like keeping my mouth shut and watching interactions and watching how people are you know, verbally or non-verbally communicating to one another. And I just kind of soak that all up like a sponge, and I'll just, you know, try and capture that in a notebook, because there's little story moments from that. And to your point of on my bio, I just feel that traveling helps people really learn a lot about who they are, what they like, what they don't like. I think it's a great way if you're interested in a partner to like kind of test the waters to see if you're really compatible. Just go on a trip with them. You know, go somewhere where you don't know where to go and things like that, and you can't rely on GPS. It's going to force you to come together and find ways to communicate. And I just love that about that. And you know, storytelling is being able to kind of extract those real lived experiences, those truths, and put those into moments where somebody watching a scene or sequence is going to be able to relate to it in some fashion because there's an authentic truth to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the aspect that you talked about in terms of languages and understanding, I see that certainly evidenced in LUKi, right? Because not only do you kind of have like a made up robotic language and things like that, it's almost like irrelevant because through the body language and stuff like that, you understand what's going on. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's fascinating to be able to connect those dots and see it in your work in that way. And I understand that's not really a question, but yeah, art, I guess in that sense is observation, right?
Absolutely. And that to me is the power and beauty of animation where you get to, I mean, look at what they did with Flow, right? None of those animals spoke. There wasn't a big name attached to those creatures, but you still felt some sort of emotion for understanding what the cat was going through. And coming back to LUKi, we've got this world of robots, which we had a very limited time to figure out where the heck does this robot live? What kind of language do they speak? What do they eat anything? If they do eat something, what do they eat? You know, that sort of thing. How is it made? What is their jobs? Like all that kind of stuff. So a lot of that comes back to the performance of what they're doing. And then we relied heavily on making sure the design of the characters and the eyes specifically were really emotive because just knowing specifically in animation, but also in film, uh, the audience is going to be looking at the eyes and this kind of like triangle, if you will, of expression of interest on the face to get those subtleties and understand what's going on with the character. So that was where we spent some of our focus with that. And then, you know, coming up with a made up robot language was kind of secondary to that.
And just to go back a little bit, because I know I didn't like set up the table quite as well. Can you give us like what is LUKi? I mean, obviously I know I've seen it and stuff like that, but for is it available to watch for anybody who might want to watch it?
Yeah, so the film is still touring in a few festivals. We've got maybe 10 more festivals we're waiting to hear back from for this year. But yeah, LUKi is a animated short film that follows the story of this character, LUKi, living his best life until one day he's diagnosed with the disease ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease in America or motor neuron disease around the world. And then the rest of the story follows how LUKi decides to live out his life on his terms with this diagnosis. And the film was inspired by this couple in the Netherlands, Sasha and Anjo. And Anjo was diagnosed with ALS about 7.5 years ago. And they had no idea how to explain this terrible disease to their children at the time, both under the age of 10. And Sasha started drawing this robot years and years ago to help it kind of explain to their children what was going on. And I actually have the original prototype. So the
Oh
original
wow.
of the character, you can kind of see how different it is. But there was giant light bulbs in the joints, and then the kids could kind of on paper could fill in the light bulbs. And as you know, Daddy's hand or uh, ankle or elbow or whatever was going out, they could fill it in and kind of follow along with Anjo's diagnosis that way. And then kind of one thing led to another. They were able to raise some initial funding. Somebody gave them a wild idea to make it into an animated short film, and eventually they found my company because this is the kind of stuff that the whole reason why I started my company was to focus and tell stories that can make an impact in the world using animation.
Yeah. And the company's Big Grin Productions, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I fell in love with like it as a standalone piece is amazing, but then also the greater social impact that it can have. And this is like, I get excited on your behalf, and I hope that others are seeing it of it's not just like it could be its own world, right? Like there's so much to be able to be done with this character and kind of spread that educational component, but also being entertaining. Like it's not just, filling you with knowledge or whatever, and it's boring. It's got that Pixar sort of feel where it takes you through all the emotions in whatever this 20-minute runtime or whatever it is. So you go through happiness and sadness and so forth. And I think by the end we were all crying when I saw it. So,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
That was a goal, and it was really challenging to do. And to your question, where people can see it, people can go online, and I can send you the info to the foundation that owns it, globalneuralYcare.org. They have it on their website. They also have additional materials for families and people dealing with this disease or motor neuron disease. But there's also an activity book and a coloring book for families to utilize and use these components to go through the film and help acknowledge like what's kind of bubbling up. And yeah, one of the challenging things was like, how do you take a disease that can steal somebody's life away within a year or less, or maybe 5 years at max of what most people are, sort of given in terms of timeline, or some people like Stephen Hawking have lived with it for their whole life, and then condense that down into like 9 minutes. So it was very challenging, and we is around 10 minutes and 40 seconds total, but that was a big challenge to kind of weave those arcs, if you will. And how do we get people to care about LUKi, but not, like you're saying, not make it overly educational, and then have some entertainment aspects, and get people to care about this character by the end?
yeah. So since it's not necessarily your idea, like how influential were you with the shaping of the story? Because I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that they had this idea of how to utilize the character, but then you come in and really shape that story. Is that a correct
That
assumption?
Yeah, that's pretty correct. It was kind of like just playing with clay. They had the idea of just LUKi and a doctor character. They came to us with an original outline. That outline, the film was pretty rough, but there were certain scenes that stuck, right? The original kind of film, and what we agreed to do, which was a little crazy, was we storyboarded and created an animatic based off their original idea, because at the same time we needed to garner their trust, and they didn't trust anybody with their third baby, if you will, because they just didn't believe anybody would care about this subject matter as much as them. And what I agreed to do was tell them, like, we'll storyboard it, your original story, and then you can see what's wrong, what's missing, and what's working, and where we can go from there. Because I would just use that as, okay, here's our foundation. Now let's start building on top of this and make a better story. And my producer, Adrian Ochoa, was great in terms of holding her hand and showing him a lot of like behind the scenes documentary stuff or things from Disney and Pixar. It's like, this is an animatic, this is a storyboard, because they had no idea what any of that was. And as you probably know, working with clients or people that don't know anything about the process, it can take a lot of extra effort. So we showed them all that. We boarded it, and then they're just like, "Oh my God, I love this. Let's just make that." And I was like, "No, whoa, 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 whoa." This kind of backfired, but eventually they were able to kind of see what we needed to do. So one example would be the original film. Over half of it took place in the doctor's office because it was like too accurate to like what happens, but emotionally, like we weren't moving anything with the story. Uh, and if you remember that moment when LUKi comes home after the diagnosis, being at the doctor's office, he kind of tears that brochure and gets upset. That was never part of the film. That was something I wrote into it, just knowing that we needed a place and a moment to sit with LUKi and his emotions and to feel what he's feeling in there, because I wanted audience members that are dealing with this to be able to see themselves in LUKi and also honor their emotions. And then also allow children that are seeing their parents or loved ones struggling with this to allow them to see like, oh, it's not me, or it's not because of me that's affecting my parents. They're dealing with this, and it's okay to honor these emotions of being frustrated and sad and mad and like confused about this whole situation. So there's a lot of that kind of happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And just out of curiosity, how many panels were the original storyboards? Like, because that's, I mean, that's a pretty ballsy move, right? Like to that's a lot of drawing for potentially,
Yeah,
you might use some of it, you might use none of it.
yeah, and I was very clear with the story team, because the way I staffed up the crew was knowing that some of their work might not be used, and but I tried to like salvage aspects of it and moments, whether or not it was directly their boards, it would just be kind of me tweaking it. But that first cut was like 16, 17 minutes long. And so there was a lot of work that was done. And then it was just like, okay, how do we trim this down from there? And then once we kind of had it in kind of fighting shape, pretty much the board team was done, because I was using all of the board artists to help me just quickly get the idea out and then start from there. And I boarded a couple sequences from there, but then I took on finishing the rest of the boards or revising the boards with one other artist, and just kind of like chipped away at it. And one of the last things I did was trying to figure out the transitions, because I wanted to condense time and move things a lot quicker. But I was just banging my head against the wall trying to figure out the transitions for a while.
And when you talk about your team, I'm curious, like, I mean, I recall quite a number of credits on screen. So it seems like you had a pretty big team.
Yeah, that was by far the biggest project Adrian and I have worked on and managed. Typically, I mean, years ago, any given time, there'd be about 12, 15 of us. Depending on the client's need or director's need, we kind of staff up, and I could grow from 15 to 25 and scale pretty easily. This, we had over 100 artists, most of which were excited and started volunteering once they kind of found out and heard that an animated short film about ALS was being made. And they, I don't know, to my surprise, I found that people actually generally cared about being part of something that was more meaningful and going to make an impact in the world. And it like moved me, because I was super frustrated that we didn't have funding to pay people properly. And so what I kind of structured was, for the senior artists, or say for animators example, the juniors and mid-level could learn from them. I had amazing animation supervisors, and everybody below the kind of senior talent line got paid, whether it was peanuts or not. They got paid, but they were learning in other ways and receiving value outside of it being monetary or not. And then we were able to kind of move quickly that way, where I could think about, okay, this super senior artist I could put on this really difficult shot, and then help build the junior animators up, starting them on CB and then eventually A shots.
Yeah, no, that's I appreciate your openness to talk about, because I get it. You know, we all want to ultimately, hire all the right artists, right, pay them what they're worth and stuff like that. But as I mentioned kind of at the top, there is this generosity about, just, again, I think just artists in general, that, going back to the idea of storytelling, like, we want to tell meaningful stories.
Yeah.
And, no different than I was drawn to this, um, the mission aspect of this short film, right? Like that it's such a central aspect to it. And that's why, like, yeah, I want this to be more out in the world, known and stuff like that, because of what it can do. And I want you guys, if you guys so choose, like, I think there's so much potential to be done with this beyond just that short film.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think there's like so much more to play within that world, things to kind of do within that as well. And it kind of also allows us to showcase what Big Grin's capable of in terms of punching above our weight class, in the sense that, um, a lot of people thought this was a big, studio project, and it wasn't, even though there was a lot of people on board. Just I leveraged relationships that I've built for the last 15, 20 years, and specifically people that I've wanted to work for or with for that long. Um, but it's being able to kind of take all that experience and compress it into this short period of making a short film. And the other difficult part of this was like knowing that when we started making LUKi, we were already on borrowed time because Anyo only had a certain amount of years left to live. And I think him being a part of this process allowed him to kind of extend that timeline a little bit. Uh, and sorry, today's actually the date. A year ago today, he passed away. So I was just kind of
Oh,
reflecting
wow.
on that, and my mind was kind of jumping. Um, but part of the goal for me and the team was I needed to get this done before he passed away, and uh, just being transparent and open with the team of like what's going on, where we were at, where Anyo was at physically, emotionally, all of that, and we just had this like kind of beating drum pulse to the film, where a lot of these films, if you followed the Oscar stuff this year, like Wonder took 8 years, Yuck, 5 some years. Typically, it's like 5 years for most of these short films because they're not properly funded and things like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of start and stop. Yeah.
Yeah, and we
Uh,
had some start and stop on this as well, but we were able to do it all in 2 years and 7 months, which was pretty
uh,
quick, but also took a while as well.
yeah. No, that's incredible. And I can't imagine the pressure of mentally on you for that because it's one thing to have like deadlines and want to do best by your team and stuff like that and like get it out into the world as much as you can, but the emotional weight of like having it out in the world completed before someone passes away. Yeah, I don't know, I don't envy you, but I applaud your grace to be able to pull it off.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it once it was done, I think I was just like so in it and kind of laser focused. I didn't realize how much of a toll it kind of took on me. And then, my wife and I joke now, like now when I look in the mirror, like I'm almost all gray on the side. So it's like there's clear visible stripes that were earned during production.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get that. I mean, just this past 5 years has felt like 20 decades rolled into one. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
um, for sure. But I'm curious. Then let's talk about Big Grin in general. What you guys are working on. I see some commercial stuff and things like that. Yeah, so I'd love to feel free to use this as an opportunity to pitch the studio.
Cool. Yeah. So typically we work with clients that have some sort of message and they want to utilize animation or specifically characters to help them tell their story and get that message out into the world. So we've done stuff with commercials, Fortune 500 companies, some games. And a couple years ago, we started working with one of our bigger clients, Apple. So we're a preferred vendor with them. So that's nice having some of those larger corporations to work on projects where we're going to have a little bit more of a decent budget. And then at the same time, I've been wanting to pivot Big Ren away from being a vendor studio because for almost 8 years now, it's been okay. We take on the client work. Let's take a percentage of that and feed it into our own projects, and then at night or weekends we work on our own ideas so we can start pumping out our own IP. But the cycle has just been going on for so long that it's kind of just wearing us down. And then now, because of the state of the industry, that it's been in this kind of turmoil for a few years, the writing's been on the wall for a while. and the fact that nobody's like, they're a little hesitant of greenlighting original IPs, but to me, the pendulum has got to shift back to the opposite side at some point. So I just want to be ready for that. And then also it's like, okay, if nobody else is going to say yes to this, how do we find ways to say yes and to start doing this ourselves and working with artists from all over the world to make these stories come to life. So for example, one story I worked with my producer, Adrian on, he's a great writer. Part of the deal, him coming on board and working with me again was, let's grow you as a writer and let's come up with a show idea. So we came up with something called Sammy's Customs. It's based on his childhood. It follows this young Latina teenager growing up in an auto body shop, based on her Tio and her father, creating custom cars in the world, which is very much an inspiration from Adrian's upbringing, where both of his Tios had auto body shops. But the thing is that most people don't know this, Adrian's uncle was the influence and inspiration for Ramon in Pixar's Cars, because Adrian used to work at Pixar for a long time. And when John Lasseter and the team was like, hey, we have got an idea for this lowrider character, but we don't know who the hell it should be or how to create this, Adrian invited him over to the shop, and then John got to talk with his uncle, and then after the meeting, he was just like, that's Ramon. So his uncle actually got to design one of the paint jobs in the first Pixar films for that character. And so for Adrian, it's been really important for him to also see his Latin community and his family upbringing highlighted in a way that hasn't been done before, where there are some projects, films and things like that coming out for like Latin families. But for him, he grew up in an upper middle class community, kind of the only Mexican family in a white neighborhood type of thing. So there's some built-in conflict, but comedy that we can mine from that. And then also highlight this beautiful setting and backdrop of this car world that, typically in features or in, some recent TV shows, like, Mexicans driving lowriders. What do people normally think of? Oh, they're a gangbanger or they're a criminal, that sort of thing, right? And we want to twist that narrative. So we've got that project. We've got a lot of artwork for that. We've got about 5 scripts for that. We've submitted to festivals. We've won some accolades and things like that. We've got a bunch of other projects that we've done, and one's called Mint Julep. We've submitted that to the Austin Film Festival a couple years ago. We got second round status on that script. That one's kind of this Casablanca meets Mad Max type of world in a 1940s post-apocalyptic world. And then since December of last year, once we were not shortlisted, I've just been kind of focused on trying to find new work, but also just heads down on new IPs and like looking to acquire and option projects as well. So that's been a little bit of where my focus is. And to be honest and transparent, where we're at with Big Grin is we're kind of in a transitional point where I don't personally want to keep doing business as we were. And I feel we need to grow and evolve with these times. And, there's a lot of crap with AI, the industry, there's nobody greenlighting stuff. I'm seeing the ripple effect into the other vendor studios across the world look at all the studios that are closing recently. And so everybody's kind of hurting right now. And I'm just taking this moment to step back into like, what's in my controllables, right? Well, I can control the stories and the narratives that we want to tell. And then, timing and finding the right financiers and things like that'll come.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a precarious state, both in live action, unscripted and animation, stuff like that. In many ways, like some of the ideas seem so obvious to me, and yet it's just a matter of someone pulling the trigger, because everyone's like, oh, well, no one goes to the movies. Well, I'm like, yeah, because you keep the movie in for 2 weeks and then it's available on VOD. So you've trained everyone to go. So of course they're not going to, like they need a longer window.
Yeah. Or the marketing's so terrible that nobody knows what the film's about. or
Yeah,
it makes it look like it's something when it's actually not that thing.
exactly. Yeah. So, but I applaud your effort. And yeah, it sounds like you've got quite a number of exciting projects. So kudos to you. And yeah, I think too, I think you're hinting at it, but I know from my perspective, I never look at the industry as just Hollywood. I think a lot of newer filmmakers, they say the word industry and then it's like, okay, Hollywood, Hollywood, Hollywood. I'm like, there's a global market. And I don't know about you, but like I know cinephiles, right? Like movie critics that I was like, hey, pay attention to Neja too. And this was after it already made like $1 billion, like it was nothing. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what do you mean? What do you Neja 2? It's a Chinese animated movie. Like it's a movie. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, this is nuts to me. This thing made $1 billion like that. And now it's made two. And people are just
Yeah, now
being
it's
like
too.
coming to the table of like, oh, I've heard of this movie called Neja 2. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Had you seen the first one?
I had not actually, believe it or
Okay.
not.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
neither. Me neither.
Yeah. But the fact that it's, available and stuff like that. So I caught up with that. And
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those like very interesting ones in the sense that there's things culturally that I didn't understand necessarily, but I appreciated overall. And I obviously understood enough to enjoy it, but I would
Hmm.
love to, it made me want to like dive into Chinese mythology and stuff like that. And the fact that like it goes against the grain on so many things, and not that I want to turn this to the Neja 2 sort of podcast, but
It's all good.
um, the idea that like you have a kids movie ostensibly that's 2.5 hours long. That is insane.
Yeah, that's a long runtime for an animated film too.
But they pulled it off, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
So like throw out the rule book, people.
yeah, exactly. And kudos to them. I'm curious, and I haven't gone down a rabbit hole quite yet on the production or anything, but I'm curious if they, because I know the first film did okay,
Yeah, it
and
did
then
like
this,
800 million or yeah, 800 million, something like
yeah,
that.
which it's fantastic for the budget and for an animated film like that. I'm just curious if they felt like if they could feel the energy behind the second one and kind of knew what they had in the same sense that like I feel Inside Out 2 from some of the people I know that were at Pixar. Number one, it was already kind of tumultuous with the impending layoffs coming, but two, I think that they're all just like really hoping that it would do well so they could keep their jobs. I don't think that they actually knew it would do as well as it did. I'm always curious about like the energy behind things because again, people that are pouring their heart and soul into stuff, I always believe that can be felt on and seen in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know to that effect, but they had a crazy pipeline. They had like 178 studios working on different parts of it, and
Whoa.
they all managed to like be cohesive and not tumultuous whatsoever. And so it seemed,
That's
and
crazy management.
yeah, it's just kind of wild in so many different aspects. And to your sort of point, it is a very big aspect of Chinese mythology that they're drawing from. So it's like a 16th century sort of very popular book.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I kind of almost look at like Howl's Moving Castle from Miyazaki, but that was also a very popular book as well. And so,
Yeah,
that idea that you're talking about taking ideas that are pre-existing, and especially like, fun children's ones, like, Coraline still continues to do really well. That's to me, a fun
exactly.
movie, fun book, and so yeah, I mean, I think, and to me, I can't claim credit for this idea, but the distinction needs to be it's not like, okay, oh, we have this popular book, now go adapt it, because that's hired guns. It's like, no, someone like you looking at a piece of property and saying, ooh, there's something here. And I feel like I could do that. Like Lord of the Rings to me is an example of that with Peter Jackson. Yes, it was a known property, but Peter came in with his very big grand ideas of how he wanted to adopt it
Absolutely.
versus like, okay, I'm a hired gun because I got to do it for whatever.
Yeah, 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 and him throwing so much of his life and passion behind it. And again, like with Lord of the Rings, uh, I also feel like had Guillermo del Toro been able to do The Hobbit, like the Hobbit's, films probably would have been way better than they were, because it was, oh, he's no longer on this. Peter, you come back and
Yeah.
then just make it. And it's like, well, what do I have to play with? Like these are the okay, well, here we go. And it is what it is for that. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as like the trends in the industry, what are you saying? I mean, I was, I'm very new to the animation world and I'm very humble. And my side of it, I'm very curious, obviously, about like 2D animation because that's what the project I'm working on. But so certainly you're well above my weight class as far as knowledge. So I'm curious to, hear your insights as to what's going on.
Yeah, and not to have this be a plug for Animation Summit, World Summit, but that event is one of my favorites, and I've only gone to it for a couple of years. But there's Kid Screen, there's obviously ANSI and France, and MIPCOM and a couple others. But the what I really enjoy about the summit is the fact that it's a really intimate setting, and there's no it's not businessy like Kid Screen in that sense of like setting up a schedule beforehand and meeting with people or asking for who's on the list. There's a lot of inspired conversations and flow to meeting people. And from what I've seen the last couple of years from Kid Screen and the summit and things like that is, I know that, and we see this, the larger studios have been kind of hemorrhaging and they're scared. People in positions of power are scared to greenlight anything. It's kind of their reputations, but their job on the line. I personally think that's unfortunate. And then the eyeballs are just not where they used to be for a lot of these places. Whether it's the market for films in the theater or streaming and stuff like that. So Kid Screen 2 years ago, they were hinting at eyeballs should be, maybe we look at YouTube, maybe we look at short form, like shorter form content. This year, it's like everybody and their grandma go on YouTube first. And then we've seen Nickelodeon, for example, it will put their kind of test shows on YouTube first and see the reaction, and then they're kind of gathering data around that, and then they'll greenlight a project based on how well it's doing there. There's other smaller studios that I see from like Brown Bag Films to was it Nine Media Group? Um, what's another one? That are starting to focus solely on shorter form content and just kind of build things up from there. And this has been something that we've been trying to figure out and crack ourselves the last couple of years. But the thing with animation is it's labor intensive, and it just takes a while where it's like, okay, we've got something that's coming out this year, but we've been working on it for 3 or 4 years type of thing. And I'm trying to figure out how can we condense that into making, because short form content, TikTok, YouTube, the stories, all that crap. It's all about like how consistent can you be to just like put pieces out weekly just to build that audience. So that's where I'm trying to like figure out how we can play in that world. And 2D side of stuff, there's pros and cons to I think both. 2D you can be a little bit more nimble, a little bit more agile in terms of just like putting stuff out there. And then there's also the 2D side of the beauty for me in traditional hand-drawn animation and the kind of freedom and the craftsmanship that can come from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of in the similar boat where people are like, well, can you, just start churning out short form content on TikTok and build an audience? I'm like, that means I have to technically, like, it's intended as a feature. So that means I have to figure out short
Yeah.
form content, essentially creating it from scratch
Yeah.
in the hopes,
Now I gotta be a content creator and marketing expert, and it's completely different mindset. And it's been something I've been studying uh since like November of last year, of just like, because I knew of Mr. Beast, but I didn't know like who the hell he was really. And I've been so kind of removed and to a certain degree like against posting stuff online like this, which is a little silly. But and also feel like an old guy. Um, but like after studying what he's done and some of these other influencers and YouTubers and things like that, I can see the benefit. But it's like, man, they tell you like, oh, you want your feature, build an audience. It takes so much effort just to do that on top of making sure that your feature is going to be solid. But I have also come to the conclusion that I don't think there's a direct correlation or result from a celebrity's following on Instagram that translates into money at the box office. You maybe one or two guys would be like The Rock or Kevin Hart, but are all 350 million people that are following The Rock going to see his movie opening weekend? Absolutely not. And when I see and hear things like that, or kind of like, lesser known artists, it's like, well, what's your following? Or we'll pick you up if you've got X amount of followers on this idea. Will they move over to longer form content to follow it? I don't know. I
Yeah,
personally don't think
I
it.
don't think so. I mean, my this is more anecdotal, but I see, my sort of regular day to day is in the podcast space, and everything's like going to video there, and everyone's putting out TikTok clips and stuff like that in hopes of driving traffic back to the long form podcast. The conversion rate is not there. Like it's just not. And I've seen,
There you go.
you can have 20 million Instagram followers. It's like they're on Instagram. They're
Hmm.
not trying to go now to Apple Podcasts to listen to your thing. Some
Yeah.
might, but it's still a very small percentage. And I think that idea that we can just move people from one platform and really a medium to a different medium, it's just not there in that same way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I kind of, I put out stuff because I like to be educational and stuff like that. But I think it's in some ways like a fool's errand. I mean, I really applaud. I know Chris Nolan in many ways is like singular, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I also think he's there because he is so singular. He's like, no, I'm a filmmaker. I'm going to make movies. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not answering your text. I'm not like picking up the phone. I'm writing a script. I'm making a movie, and that's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I think there's a lot to that. And then even coming back to the business side of things, like how can we niche down in terms of, right now we can do script to final render, soup to nuts type of stuff. But honestly, it's been a race to the bottom, and the conversations I've had with and just taking the time over the last couple of years to getting to know studios all over the world and knowing these outsourced studios are becoming the outsourcing of the outsourcing. Like they can't even take the productions on because the budgets are so low. So then they have to outsource that work. And I'm like, well, what are we doing here?
yeah,
It's just a race to the bottom. And I personally don't want to I don't want to keep contributing to that, but also it's like this feast or famine, and it's just a struggle. So it's like, how do we take that Christopher Nolan kind of mindset and like maybe just focus, or maybe Phil, we could just win the Powerball and just fund the project however we want,
that
put
would
the
be
team
nice.
together, that sort of thing, or find the right investors. Because I know that there's money out there. It's just a matter of
I
finding.
believe that, I mean, I had
Yeah.
someone tell me like, hey, why don't you just try to compress your budget for my movie, like well below $1 million? I'm like, listen, at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, if I wanted to be an asshole, we could make it for 500,000, you know, but that's not my goal. And like to your point, I know like eventually someone's making money off of all this. I just know that.
Yeah.
And
Just not the
so
artist right now.
yeah, and so I'm not going to feel guilty about doing an actual budget, looking at it, and being like, okay, this is still a tight budget in the realm of what we're trying to create, but it's also not like it gives us the resources we need and to be, relatively comfortable. So I'm not
Mhm.
gonna, I don't know, maybe that's foolish. Maybe I'll never get the funding. But like, I also look at it in this way whenever I go into a room to pitch. I'm like, this movie's happening. You can join or not. I'll
Yeah.
find my fucking way. I don't give
Yeah.
a fuck if you care to join or not. I
Yeah.
would suggest you do because we can make it
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah. The train's moving, whether you get on or not, I don't care. So it's like now or never. We had that a little bit with LUKi in the beginning because we approached literally every single nonprofit in the sector for ALS and M&D. and ask them, hey, what do you think of this idea? And everybody across the board is like, oh my God, we love this. How can we support you? And it's like, well, you can support by opening up your checkbook. And they're like, and for some, rightfully so, they're like, oh, we can't put money towards this. We're only for research. We're only for, this or that. I understand that. And then they come back and say, but we will support you when the film is done. Even when the film was done, I was like, how come this isn't blowing up, right? How come other people are not speaking about this or promoting it and things like that? But that was our mindset as well, where for me, it's like, we're going to do this, whether or not somebody is going to like upfront this cost. And there's also to that point, and I believe by you kind of staying true to that vision, uh, the less money you take now, the more freedom you're going to have, right? And Guillermo del Toro talks about this all the time with his projects. Is just like he'll take less money so he can be more true to his vision, and not have to deal with all the kind of scrutiny and kind of BS on the back end. And I know if I had teamed up with one of the foundations to begin with on LUKi, it would be a completely different film.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before we sort of wrap out, I do want to talk about your Oscar push for the consideration, because no, because it's fascinating to me. It's a whole separate job
Yeah.
that you're not getting paid for. If
No.
anything, it's probably costing you money, and and not only that, then at least from my perspective, I like to work. And it's not that I don't enjoy meeting people and stuff like that. And yes, like if someone invited me to like screen my movie, I'd do it fine. But once I'm kind of done with the project, I'm done with it. That's why I don't do theater, because I could not do the same thing over and over, night after night.
Yeah.
Creatively, I've moved on.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious on your perspective of that, because certainly it's not an experience that I've had to do. I've done festivals, but that's as analogous as it gets.
Yeah, the whole Oscar push was always something I was always very curious about, and I didn't have experience in that realm until last year, and now I have a whole bunch of experience, even in the festival route. Something that much of which I've been helping other filmmakers trying to navigate the festivals and things like that, which I enjoy. Um, the Oscars is its own beast. uh, we watched the Oscars when they were on. So we had our first child. He was born kind of in the beginning phases of this whole Oscar push last year, and at the end of August. And it was what I would recommend for sure is don't have a baby at the same time you're trying to do the Oscars push. But it was so much, it was so taxing, and it's costly in terms of actual money spend, emotionally. There's an kind of an old way of doing things in Hollywood, and then there's like the new ways of doing things, and I'm trying to figure out how to do both of those. Uh, and something that I was really diligent about was reaching out to past winners, past nominated filmmakers and things like that, and just extracting information to apply it. Like, okay, what works for us here? Because I had a feeling that some of the larger studio-backed films would be some of our bigger competition outside of the ones that have done really well, like Cypress. Cypress beat us at Tribeca, also at Anamayo, but I actually preferred this. LUKi would win audience award pretty much at a lot of the festivals, which I think is kind of cool, especially for the nature of the film. But seeing these remarkable films like Cypress or Yuck or Tennyson Oranges and things like that do really well, and it's like, what are they doing? But in order to kick things off, you need to work with an agency, and there's a handful of agencies. They all have different retainers. They all have different kind of monthly costs. And then there's some that just focus on publicity. There's some that are just on strategy, getting you into like the room and things like that. And one thing that I was hell bent on was trying to get LUKi in front of the studios, just knowing that where are the most of the voters, right? Where I thought most of the voters were. in LA in the studios. So let's get LUKi there and speak about it. And for me, I thought we had a compelling film in terms of not just the story of LUKi, but what I thought was more interesting was the story behind the story about Anyo and wanting to speak to that. And then also in relation to all that, I thought that if we could make it to the Oscar stage, like say top five, it would have been such a great platform for us to speak on a national, global level about this disease that's incredibly underfunded and not doing so well. That would be really beneficial. So that was kind of our goals and being real with like, okay, why are we doing this, right? And also to honor Anyo and his legacy. Um, but man, it is a grind. It is super expensive. We got teamed up with when you came to see the film. We got teamed up with a couple live action filmmakers that I met at the San Diego Film Festival last year. We call them Team Rhino, but and then Buscando Alma, The Last Ranger is the Rhino film that was in the top five for narrative films, and it was just cool to be with those guys and in that kind of block and like how all of our films to me felt pretty tight in terms of there being a little narrative arc just for the audience to experience, and then being with other animation films. But to do that, you've got to find screenings yourself or team up with somebody for those screenings. It costs thousands of dollars to get into the theaters. Typically, you'd focus on LA, New York, London. After this year, I think that there's been a huge monumental shift to the European market. Um, I don't know exactly how, but I do know that there's more European voters, and just seeing the top 15, the fact that there was five French films in the top 15, one American film, like one was a co-production. Like to me, the whole landscape kind of shifted, and then I also felt that films that looked like they were backed or bigger productions were kind of looked down upon in that sense from maybe the European group. And if there's anybody on your podcast that listens that tells me I'm full of shit, please email me afterwards and tell me I'm full of shit, because I'm really curious about this, because I've been wondering about it because there was no big films this year on the animation side. No Pixar, no Disney, nothing. And they had some contenders. And I almost feel like maybe the last couple of years, the results of, 3 years ago, a Netflix short film won, beautiful film, also cause-based about school shootings. Then there was the Apple project, and they spent millions on marketing that damn thing for the Oscar, right? And then last year, or sorry, the year before, yeah, last year was a very well produced short film by Electro League, but that the production studio that made it was Weta, so like it was just like pristine. It was really high quality. So it was like 3 years in a row you've got like back to back kind of major studio looking stuff. So maybe voting members were like, hey, let's go like super indie this time. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. So definitely knowing your market and having members in Europe as well, I think is a bigger component to playing in this kind of a global field.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate those insights. Yeah, I mean, it's an arduous road, but hopefully, the benefit of meeting and networking, hopefully it pays off. Like it's always one of those things. Like, it might not happen like right away, but in a year or
Yeah,
two, whatever it is, I think it all comes to fruition.
that's kind of what I'm hoping for, and that I had to keep reminding myself and checking my expectations and just why am I doing this? Uh, the kind of exposure. And my wife and I moved down to LA 2 years ago. So to be able to, and in my mindset coming down into LA was by the time LUKi is done, I want everybody to know the film and I want to know the studios. So being able to have access and go into the studios and do that sort of thing was an incredible experience for me. And hopefully, like you said, something comes of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything else you want to sort of share before I let you go that may be on your mind about LUKi, yourself, your studio, the state of
Uh,
animation, whatever?
yeah, for LUKi, if you know somebody that's dealing with this terrible disease and you want to support and follow along, go check out globalneurowhitecare.org and all the great work that they're doing. Again, we're going to be in a few more festivals for the beginning half of this year, and then hopefully it'll go on YouTube and people can just find it easily. For us, if you are somebody that's looking for animation production work, check out Big Grin Productions. You can go to Instagram or our website. Email me directly at Toby@BigGrin. Uh, Love working on projects that have a meaning behind it. And if you're an indie artist, keep doing your damn thing. It's a challenging road, but I think it's a worthy road and an endeavor to go after your dreams and pursue that.
Well, again, I appreciate your time, your wisdom, your insights, all that good stuff. So thank you.
Appreciate you, Phil.